Hello and welcome to the No Balls Podcast. I'm your host Patrick McDonald, with me co-host Sheldon Kaufman. Today we're here to continue the NBA preseason show where we give a full episode to every team and we discuss their offseason and give a preview for what we think this 25 season is going to be for them. Today we have the Houston Rockets. They're starting to turn it around. Following the post-James Harden era, they're really starting to see the dividends of rebuilding a little bit, and I think they have a really exciting team. Do you have any comments on them before we get started?
Now let's get right into it.
Yeah, so they took a big step forward from year to year. They were one of the worst teams in the league like 2 seasons ago. They were not looking like an NBA team. Then they bring in Ime Udoka. They kind of benefit from the weird situation that happened in Boston. I think he's a really good head coach. Anyway, 41-41, 11th in the Western Conference. They were a game behind the Warriors for that play-in spot. A little unfortunate for them if they were in the Eastern Conference. They would have easily made the play-in. But, of course, they're not. They missed the playoffs. They missed the play-in altogether. Either way, this was a really fun team last season. 44 and 38 expected record, 27-14 at home, 14-27 on the road. So clearly a much better home team than road team. Pre All-Star break, 24-30, and then 17-11 post All-Star break. They really turned things on towards the end of the season. We'll talk about why, I'm sure, in a little bit. Versus the Eastern Conference, they were 13-17, and then versus the West, they were 28-24. So, a lot better versus the Western Conference, which is one of the better conferences. A lot of that has to do with scheduling. You play Western Conference teams towards the end of the year. That's where Houston really got hot. Good for them. They did really good against the West. In clutch games, they were 17-23. This was around 26th in the league, so they were not very good in clutch games. It's a big part in why they underachieved their expected record. And then in other games, they were 24-18. Do you have any record comments on Houston?
Yeah, like you said, really fun team last year. They were missing a big piece down the stretch, I'm pretty sure, with Alperen Sengun missing a bunch of games in late March, early April. And he really bursted on the scene. I'm sure we'll talk about him. I can't remember if this is his rookie year, if this is his sophomore year. And then
It might
also
be his
Jalen,
third year.
third year. Third
Yeah.
year, and also Jalen Green took a huge step as well. Fred VanVleet looked good. This was a really good team last year. Let's talk about the statistical part about it, Pat. Let us know.
Yeah, so Sengun got hurt right as they were, right midway through them really ascending. If you can pull up the numbers after Sengun got hurt, like their record after, that would
Yeah,
be very interesting. While you do that, last season, 0.9 net rating, ranked 18th. On the offensive side of the floor, they were 113.7, which was ranked 20th, so not a super great offense. And then defensively, 112.8, which was the 10th ranked defense. Talking a little bit more about their offense, they were 23rd in transition offense, about in line with what their overall offense was, but it still wasn't great. Going forward to the half court, 9th in pick and roll ball handler efficiency, 11th highest frequency, 72nd percentile. They ran a solid amount of this. They were pretty versatile with how they ran their offense. It was very interesting to see that. 13th in roll efficiency, 3rd frequency, 59th percentile in roll efficiency. Again, they're just pretty solid in this category. Not super good, not super bad. And they do run it a lot. They like to run a lot of post-ups. They like to get Sengun a lot of passing opportunities out of these post-ups. It was a good way to generate shots for some of their worst players. 17th in post-up efficiency. I was talking about post-ups, but pick and rolls, they ran a solid amount of those. 9th in post-up frequency. I just gave the spiel about post-ups. either way, 45th percentile in post up. So they weren't actually that efficient in them, but they did like to run a good bit of them because the real reason why is 29th in isolation efficiency. They were not very good at that, so they kind of had to run post ups to self generate offense. 13th highest frequency, 3rd percentile. This will lead to a lot of the discourse about some of the individual players on this team. They just kind of couldn't create their own shot. Even if they did try a decent bit, they didn't find much success with it. Other offensive stuff, 8 in offensive rebounding. We'll get into why that's the case in a little bit. 24th in three-point percentage, 12th in three-point attempts, 20th in pull-up three percentage, and then 4th in pull-up three-point attempts. So they're taking a lot of pull-up three attempts. They're not making many. That has to do a lot with the isolation stuff. And then 24th in three-point percentage, but 12th highest attempts. They're getting a good bit of rim pressure. They don't have a ton of great shooters out there. It's a lot of younger players who are good athletes who haven't fully developed their game yet. But do you have any offensive comments? And if you found the Şengün stuff?
Yeah, I don't have like the specific win-loss record, but and between March 31st and April 11th, they lost 6 of 7 games, and when they were hot, they did not lose, and I think all those games, Şengün was out.
He definitely was. Yeah.
So yeah, but like besides that, they won all their games in March, literally, except for one game.
6 of 7 in that span. That was 6 of their 11 post All-Star break losses. So
yeah, I mean that's the play-in right there is Şengün, really. I mean,
yeah,
you kind of alluded to it with the post-ups, but he's a big part of their offense.
Yeah, and then any other offense stuff that you want to get to?
Not right now. I'll wait.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, you kind of touched on it. You know, guys can't really create their own shot. A lot of young shooters, or just guys that aren't known for shooting, i.e., Dylan Brooks. Yeah.
All right, so now we'll get into their defense. Like I said, they were 10th rated. They were 4th in transition defense. A lot of really good athletes there. You're not going to out-athlete a lot of these guys. In the half court, they were 17th in pick and roll ball handler defense, 9th highest frequency. So teams kind of shoved it down their neck a little bit. 45th percentile, so not horrible, but not great. 17th in roll defense, 24th frequency. So not too often here. They're limiting a lot of rim attempts, which is pretty good. Even if they're not great at preventing teams from making their rim attempts, they're not giving up a ton of them. Still 45th percentile, but you like having the low frequency. Post defense, 22nd with the 2nd highest frequency. So again, here they're not great at limiting or at stopping teams there, but teams are running it a lot, so it's pretty bad results here. 28th percentile, teams do it a lot. It's a lot of efficient shots, not what you'd like to see. And then 8th in isolation defense with 2nd highest frequency. This is actually pretty good. This is where they made their money on defense. Individual defenders here were not actually too bad in Houston, and teams still ran it a lot. And then 76th percentile, like I said. And then other things here, 12th in offense or in defensive rebounding. So they're ending possessions well. They're guarding in isolation well. Maybe there's still some things to clean up guarding the pick and roll, but some of that could be personnel based too. Any defensive things that you have, it can even transition to seam talk.
I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, you look at this team, just a lot of elite athleticism, and just good defenders. Talking Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, regarded as one of the pestiest, most annoying players in the NBA, and for good reason, right? Jabari Smith, athletic freak, 6'11", and he can guard guards, right? He can guard 1 through 5. Just really a lot to like there on the defensive side. Like you said, 8th in isolation defense, and we've said a lot on this podcast that really marks a true a true good defense. Even if they do have some issues on the pick and roll, I really don't see that being a problem. Alprin Sengun as well. He's proven to be a good defender, playing in that drop. They kind of like to play him in a drop coverage. On screens, he had 1.2 steals per game, so he's very active hands. This whole team has active hands, and just they play with a lot of energy on defense, which you always like.
Yeah, the energy is what really carries this team. Some of the issues with pick and roll, their primary point of attack guy is Dylan Brooks. With him, he kind of just struggles to get around screens a little bit because he's a lot wider than a lot of guys. He's a lot stronger. That tends to show up a little bit. And then Fred VanVleet, although I really like his activity on defense, and he's a pretty solid perimeter defender, even into his 30s, he can just get wiped out by screens. And then some of these younger guys, they're still developing pick and roll defense. A lot of it is technique. And drop coverage, you mentioned with Sengun. I would say he's not good enough in drop for me personally, and he's decently mobile, so I would like them to at least run a little bit more hedging or a little bit of blitzing with him. I think that's definitely something they can do. I'm sure Ime will run a lot more of it because he's a great defensive head coach. But Sengun doesn't quite have the ability to race a ton of shots at the rim. But you mentioned his hands are pretty solid. He's active, and he clearly cares out there a little bit. Like, he's improved a lot from his rookie and sophomore season on the defensive side of the floor. It's where I think he's at least, like, not before he was probably bad. Now he's a tick below average, I would call him, as far as defensive centers go. But you had mentioned Jabari. Jabari is and a lot of their other athletes too. Like, Jabari is really tall and really lengthy. He can really help rim protect there. This will move forward to their lineup stuff. They typically like to run one guard. It would be Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green starting a lot. Jalen Green sometimes would play kind of some point guard for them. Sometimes it would be Aaron Holiday running point guard for them. But they really like these flex type wing players. Amin Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Jayshawn Tate. Like, these are a bunch of guys who technically their position is probably small forward, small forward, small forward, small forward, power forward, like, technically, but they're a bunch of good athletes that can play 2 through 4 and just provide a lot of versatility for you out there. Jabari Smith, I just mentioned him with Sengun. He can erase a ton of shots from the weak side. Tari Eason's a great rebounder. Same with Jayshawn Tate, a great rebounder and a great defensive player. I'm sure we'll talk about Amin and Cam Whitmore in later sections of this episode as well. And like we mentioned, Ime Udoka, great head coach. Spent a ton of years under Greg Popovich. He had the Celtics playing the best defense that team has ever played, basically, until this season when they got Porzingis and Jrue Holiday and Derek White took a step forward. But he had a worse defensive Celtics team playing just as good as they are right now on the defensive side of the floor, and that's how the Ime Udoka Celtics really were contenders. This is a great coaching hire. Any other scheme talk that you have?
I mean, they kind of like to use Sengun as like a mini Jokic. I like to say, like you said in the post up, that he just operates out of the post, either passing it, and I mean he's just really made great strides there. 5 assists per game, 9 rebounds. I mean, just Sengun has just done a really good job of accepting that role, and it's in my opinion he's not talked about enough. But yeah, and just Jalen Green also just when he's able to take the ball up, just getting to the bucket, passing out to the shooters, just stuff like that.
It was their primary thing on offense last year, was the high post. You have a ton of great athletes around them. Kind of just let them do a lot of stuff, because before they were definitely the definition of an AAU offense.
Yeah.
That's a term we've liked to throw out there. Before that was definitely it. When they started giving the ball to Sengun more, it was like at least intelligent AAU offense. And I still think there are some elements of it there. We talked about their isolation game being so bad, they just still ran it a ton. That
Yep.
has a lot to do with it. And a lot of these guys are still learning to play, so like the little things about isolation, like the guy moving from the dunker spot to the corner to give him more space when he drives, like stuff like that can easily be improved just with a little bit of time because this roster is still so young. If that's all we have on scheme, we can go forward to their off season.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the draft this year, it's the big one that we have to talk about. They made a trade to get AJ Griffin Jr. For a second round pick. But anyway, the real point I'm trying to make here, they brought in Reed Shepard from Kentucky. Reed was a decently polarizing prospect, had a great summer league. I want to hear what you have on Reed Shepard.
So first off, we've talked about some good shooters in the class, but this probably is the best one. He shot 52% last year from 3-point line on 4 attempts. Just really good stuff. He's great in the catch and shoot. I really like his defensive instincts as well. I think he can provide a lot on that aspect and that end of it, even though he might not be the tallest guy on the court. And he's also an underrated passer in the pick and roll game. That's not really going to be a big highlight on this team that has Sengun manhandling the ball, but I mean, this is a certified shooter. This is a guy that the shot will translate to the next level, and yeah, it's a lot to like, especially if you can start finishing around. If you can figure out, how to start finishing around the rim, getting around the bigger centers in the NBA, and I really like because his weaknesses really fit well with this offense. So I think it's a really great pickup for the Rockets, and they did the right job by going up to get him.
Yeah. With Reed too, you had mentioned the 4 3-pointers a game. That doesn't sound like a ton, but he only started 5 games last year for Kentucky. He wasn't a highly recruited guy out of high school, so he had to really earn his playing time there. He shot 50% of his shot attempts were threes. He also hit 50% of those, so that's some really good stuff. Like that's insane shot making. And I will say this: the difficulty on those wasn't extraordinarily high, but you mentioned his pick and roll reads are good. When he got into summer league, that was the part of his game that I think really impressed a lot of people. Is this guy can really pass the ball, and if he can really pass the ball, he's already such a great shooter that I don't see why he can't become a great pull-up shooter out of the pick and roll. And like we mentioned before, they could not shoot pull-up jump shots last season. And I really like Reed. Before the draft cycle, or during the draft cycle, the name I always came to was Dante DiVincenzo because the shooting ability, the shooting
Sorry,
ability. You're good.
my phone slipped and Spotify started playing loud as shit in my headphones.
Yeah,
My bad. Sorry.
sorry.
It's Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah, so I would always come to DiVincenzo because he was a great shooter, and then Reed's like a really good athlete. Like I think he measured with one of like the 4 highest verticals in the draft this season. He also just has insane defensive playmaking ability, like for his size. Like the athleticism leads to that, and a lot of similarities to DiVincenzo. It's just suddenly I think Reed is actually going to be an on the ball player. Um, so if that's the case, like I don't see why this guy is at least not a great 3-point shooter, a really good passer. We'll see what his at the rim ability is in the NBA because he didn't shoot a ton of rim attempts in college either because he was primarily a spacer for a part of the season. Then he started playing really well, right? But he can at very least play next to really good players, and that's what I really like about Reed Shepard. And his summer league was awesome. Like, he's probably the best summer league player this season. What in comparison to the rest of the drafts, would you have him around 3?
I think yeah. I mean, I think out of all the guys that we talked about, this might be the most NBA ready, in my opinion. I think he comes into this offense and makes an immediate impact, but much more than anyone else. I mean, he looked like the best rookie at the summer league,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah,
Yeah, I had seen a couple people have him as high as 1, and a lot of people saying he wouldn't be a first-round pick in other drafts, and I'm like, I don't know. I kind of have him at 5, right? Like, I
yeah,
had a couple guys ahead of him, but I thought 3 was great for Reed. I thought the 2 guys who went ahead of him, I had ahead of him. I had Klingon ahead of him, and that might have been it. It might have been Reed at 4, but I thought Reed was an awesome prospect. Other off-season stuff that they did, I had mentioned AJ Griffin addition. He just never found time in Atlanta. I'm not sure how much he's going to play for them, but they could like him. He might develop his shooting ability, give him more time. And then 2 UDFAs, Nafali Dante, a big guy, and then Jack McVeigh. These are UDFA guys. They're probably on 2 ways. Nothing too significant. And then losses for them. Reggie Bullock played a decent role for them, just as a pure 3-and-D guy. And then Boban Marjanovic was really just an extra center for them.
yeah.
Do you have anything on AJ Griffin or Reggie Bullock or Boban?
I mean, like you said, I mean, Boban he was just kind of there. It's kind of the role he's played for a lot of teams as that third big. The Reggie Bullock one's a little bit more interesting just because he was one of their better 3-point shooters. I don't have the stats up, but I'm just going to assume he was just because every time I saw him shoot, it was mainly a 3-pointer. But I really don't think you lose that much. And AJ Griffin, it's a good flyer to take. Probably won't contribute that much, but who knows?
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring this one up because it happened at the deadline, but he was out for the season at that point, so a lot of people kind of probably forgot about it. They did make a move for Steven Adams.
Yeah.
So that'll replace the Boban for sure. Like, even if Steven Adams struggles to recover, a proven NBA player at center for sure.
Yeah, Steven Adams. Yeah.
So that essentially covers their offseason. They weren't too busy. They were already over the salary cap. However, going forward, a lot of that does get relieved pretty soon. And 26, this is taking forever to load, but in 2026, the number is still the same, but I'm pretty sure they could have. So Fred VanVleet's not guaranteed by then. I would imagine they still maybe pick it up. And then a ton of these younger guys aren't guaranteed. And they have some extensions that are maybe a little divisive around the NBA world. But so their maximum cap space next offseason is $110 million. Realistically, it's a little bit less than that because $45 million of that's Fred VanVleet. And then the 2 big ones are the Jalen Green and the Alperen Sengun extensions. A lot of the players in that draft class got extensions this offseason. These 2 guys were not those players. I think it makes a lot of sense because basically, do you think either of these guys would align or would be reasonable on the contract that Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, and Franz Wagner got, which was $224 over 5?
Not yet.
That's kind of how I feel about it. And going into the deadline, I kind of thought Jalen Green was going to get moved. But because I don't think the Rockets really want to pay him right now. But I have a little bit of data behind this stuff. So Fred VanVleet, I just mentioned his $45 million stuff. He's been that good for Houston. Some of their young players that I brought up here: Alperen Sengun, Amin Thompson, Jalen Green, Cameron Whitmore, and Jabari Smith. Basically, these guys, I took their net ratings with Fred VanVleet and without Fred VanVleet. Alperen Sengun with Fred VanVleet was plus 4.0. Without him was minus 12.8. So, see there, that's a 17-point swing. That's a lot. Amin Thompson plus 9.1. Without Fred VanVleet, it was minus 4.9. So that's clearly that's really significant. That's what is that? Minus 14. That's a 14-point swing. Jalen Green with Fred VanVleet was 0.2. And then without Fred VanVleet was minus 3. So Jalen Green, interestingly enough, was the least impacted by Fred VanVleet and the least hurt when Fred VanVleet went to the bench. It was only minus 3.2. So that's interesting, but he's definitely the outlier in this case. Cam Whitmore plus 9.8. Without Fred VanVleet, he's minus 8.8. So again, that's a 18-point swing. It's a big point swing for sure. And then Jabari Smith was minus 1.2 with Fred VanVleet, and then without Fred VanVleet, he was minus 7.2. So he also just wasn't as good with Fred VanVleet, but he was still a 6-point swing when Fred would go to the bench. So clearly, Fred VanVleet's a really good guy for this team. Additionally, I had mentioned the Amin Thompson and Fred VanVleet together were 9.1. Those two guys without Jalen Green on the court, who was only 0.2 with Fred VanVleet. Amin Thompson and Fred VanVleet in around 220 minutes, which is not a great sample size, but they're gonna tap into this a little bit more next season. It was 12.8, right? Like that's really good stuff. And then you add Cam Whitmore to those guys without Jalen Green, it was 18.8. That was in about 130 minutes. Really good stuff. And then the reason I want to mention this is it pops up with every player on this team. Alperen Sengun and Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks was 21.3 with Fred and Amin Thompson without Jalen Green. Alperen Sengun was 10.1, and these were in 75-minute stretches. So over the span of that, it's probably around 300, 400 minutes of time here where guys are kind of getting better without Jalen Green on the floor. And maybe not so much about Jalen Green as a player. I just think he's being used a little bit too much. He did have a great month of his season last season. I pulled up his shooting splits because right after the trade deadline, he really had a great stretch. By month, in October, it was 3 games. His true shooting was horrible. It was 48%. Whatever, it's 3 games. In November, it was 58%, which is actually pretty solid. But in December, it was 50%, which is really bad. January was 55%, which is about where he was for the season. That's not very good. February, he was 46%. That's horrible. And then March, where he really took off, was 61%, which is like kind of unattainable for a guard, but he was playing at that level for a month. And then back in April, when this is where they went 1-7 to end the season, he shot 50% true shooting again. Just a really inconsistent player, and I don't think it's fair to evaluate him based on that 1 month where he did really good and say that's what he's going forward, because over that entire time span, he's just proven to be really streaky. You kind of just have to accept him for what he is in total, and that's just a solid player, and he doesn't have great on-court statistical impact. This guy's a 6th man, is what I'm trying to get at, unless you have any takes on Jalen Green that you want to get off. Um,
I mean, yeah, I agree that they're kind of using him a little bit too much. I will agree on that point. Um, they're just interested. There were instances where I felt like he kind of tried to take over the game, and that's just not really what he has the ability to do just yet. Um, but I do think they should try to keep him. Um,
I
I think
agree. Yeah, you got
I
it.
think I think he does add a lot to this team. Um, and if Reed Shepard turns out to be really really good, he can move into a starting role. And like you said, you get Jalen Green as a six man. Um, who knows if that even happens this year? They are trying to ask too much of him. Uh, maybe if he was in a lesser role, like you said, kind of like a six-man role, he'd be a lot better. Uh, he did have that one stretch last year. I don't know if that's attainable, which probably isn't, or if he can get close to those kind of numbers. I think that he can fit right into the starting lineup. Um, But I mean, I think this team does need to try to keep him, because even if you have Jalen Green as a six man, that's a lot better than most teams' six mans, in my opinion. But yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, and just to go forward, I don't really hate him as a scorer. I think he's a fine scorer, especially if he's in a six-man role, because in a six-man role, that efficiency actually isn't that bad. Like, it's probably a tick above average for a six-man. But the big concern with me here is to be a number one scorer, you have to also be a good passer. Um, Last season, without the number one scorer type of volume, he averaged turnover percentages above guys who actually do have that type of volume, like Jamal Murray, Cade Cunningham, basically any high load guard. Like he's a tick below all of those guys, and he doesn't even have that amount of usage. And then he doesn't get the assists that those guys do. Like his assist percentage only 17%, to a turnover percentage of 11%. Typically, your starting or your lead primary initiators are around 30% assist percentage with like a 10% turnover percentage. So he's clearly just not there as a passer. But I still like the scoring. He's crazy athletic. You can't take that away from him. It's just as a six man, I think that's where he would be best used. Um, One other point I want to make here, Alfred Sengun, we mentioned his struggles defensively. With Tari Eason on the floor last season, uh, Alfred Sengun was best used. Overall, they were plus 13 in about 200 minutes played. With Fred VanVleet in 170 minutes, they were 16 plus 16 and a half. So that's just clearly that pairing works really well, and I think a lot of it has to do with Tari Eason being a great rebounder. It kind of makes up for Sengun's slight deficiency rebounding. Um, and I forgot to mention this before when I mentioned their cap space. They have a ton of picks going forward. Um,
Mm.
Next season they have the a really complicated pick, but it could be OKC or Phoenix, so it's probably going to be a late first. They don't have a 26 pick. I think that goes to OKC, but then they have the two Phoenix picks. Um, they have their own picks outside of next season in 26, and then they have a Brooklyn pick still in 2027. They made an interesting trade with Brooklyn that I want to just touch on for a second. They made a trade to trade Brooklyn two of their picks for two of Phoenix's picks. Essentially, the wording around this was that they wanted to have Phoenix's picks to trade to Phoenix for Kevin Durant, was the wording around this deal,
Yeah,
with implying that Sengun would be the key piece around a KD trade. The reason
yeah,
that you would want the Phoenix picks is because Phoenix trading, starting a rebuild would want their own first round picks, similar to what Brooklyn wanted with Bridges. Um, before they traded Mikal Bridges. What do you think about maybe moving some of their younger players to get better going forward?
Yeah. I mean, you have a lot of guys. Jalen Green is a guy that we just mentioned. That's a guy that I'm sure that you would agree that wouldn't be a bad trade piece. I mean, I don't think we've really talked about Cam Whitmore that much, but Cam Whitmore had a good season last year too, and he has a lot of upside as well. Like you said, Tari Eason, um, they have a lot of guys. I think that you can. I think that Jalen Green probably is the biggest trade candidate on this team. Um, yeah, I think you keep Sengun. I,
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think I think they want to keep Sengun because the stuff around him's just been a lot better. Like,
Yeah,
not like the situation, because they've had the same situation, but like when they've run offense through Sengun, the results have been a lot better. You had just mentioned Cam Whitmore. I want to talk about their two rookies because I think they're both awesome. Um, this was in the Wemby draft, so Whitmore was projected top 5 in that draft. He actually fell to 19, historic drop.
crazy,
Um,
crazy.
it was an injury, right? It was a knee injury that happened. Um, basically, him and Amen Thompson, I had top 5 on in
Oh
that
yeah.
draft. Coming out of that draft a year later, I still have top 5 on them. Like, based off of their rookie season, I think they both are top 5 out of that class, or maybe like 6, maybe top 6 or 7 after doing the math, because they're still, yeah, top 6, top 6. They're both top 6. Barring me completely forgetting somebody, but those, either way, I am extremely high on those guys. Do you want to talk about either one of them
I mean, I'll
individually?
touch
Beside,
on. Is there someone you really want to touch on, or you just want me to start talking about like Amen? I can talk about Amen. Yeah, Amen.
yeah, Amen's the guy I really want to talk on. I'll let you go
Okay.
first, though.
All right. Um. Well, I mean, just amazing slasher. Just super athletic. He had 9 points per game. His rebounding ability is really good as well. 6.6 last year. So a lot of good things to like. I mean, he worked really well in this offense, cut into the rim. He showed just really good finishing ability. Really good finishing ability. Uh, I mean, his 3 point shot really needs work. Um, I don't really know if that's ever gonna be a factor and if him and his or his brother's game. Um, but I mean, he's just I mean really athletic, good on defense, energy guy, great in transition. Um, just really good and really good around the rim. Yeah.
Mhm. And I just mentioned it with Jalen Green. Like, you need a number one scorer. You need them to be able to pass too. Um, maybe this is a little bullish on Amen Thompson, but if I'm looking at this roster on who could be their guy in 5 years, I think this would be my pick right here. The reason why, his athletic tools are ridiculous. Like, he just has to develop his handle a little bit, and he's like a top 5 slasher in all of basketball.
Yeah.
Um, he has he has the scoring finesse at the rim. His passing. This guy's amazing, passing the ball. Like, his feel as a rookie, the best passer in this draft. I'd have to think dating back, but he's one of the better passers I've seen since I've been actively following the draft.
Yeah.
Specifically in what they showed their rookie season. But his defense is the big one for me. His brothers, we talked about his brother as a great defensive player. I think Amen's just as good.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a smidge below, but he's, in certain ways, he is a little bit better than his brother. Nobody reads the floor, at least at this age, nobody really reads the floor and has this type of athletic ability. When Sengun got hurt, Amen Thompson was playing like kind of a small ball center last year. Even though Jabari was technically the center, like Amen Thompson was setting screens, rolling to the rim, making short roll passes. But he could also initiate with the handle, I think, in a year or two once he gets a little bit better there. This guy like really screams to me like maybe this is bullish, but Gen Z Magic Johnson, like is that a crazy? I mean, it is crazy. Like saying that, I know it's crazy, but like I just think the sky's the limit for this guy. And maybe looking at the stats, you wouldn't instantly see that. That has a lot to do with kind of one of my grudges with player evaluation, that like counting numbers kind of suck in basketball. Like,
Yeah.
I'll do a whole podcast on it, I'm sure. But, yeah, I see endless potential with him. Cam Whitmore, we might as well talk about him too, because he was great too. Similarly great athlete, except I think Cam is he's a much stronger driver of the basketball. Last season, I'm seeing he averaged 9 rebounds a game last season. I didn't know that was the case. No,
Wait.
that's per 100 possessions. That makes a lot. That makes a lot more sense. It's still it's per 36 minutes.
But would be talked about a little bit more.
Yeah, four rebounds a game, but in very limited playing time. Yeah, very limited playing time. Like, I don't know. He's very good at getting to the rim and finishing at the rim. And he takes a lot of threes. And he draws a good bit of fouls for a rookie player who wasn't given a ton of usage. He did actually have a good bit of usage, but like it was really turned up in the later parts of the season once they've kind of figured what they had there. He played Summer League this season. He was clearly kind of too good to play Summer League.
Yeah.
I really like him as a scorer. He doesn't pass the ball like at all. Like at all is really like it's absurd. But I like him as a scorer, and I think he's a good athlete to where he should be fine defensively if he's really preached to it at the NBA level. Unless you have any individual players. Do you have any other individuals you want to talk about?
Not.
All right.
Not really. No.
All right. This will get us to the lineup section. Predicting their starting lineup. What do we have going forward?
All right. I'll go Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith, Albert Sengun. Similar to a lot of things we saw last year.
See, I know that's the case. That's going to be the starting lineup. What I want to see is Fred, Amen, Cam Whitmore, Jabari, and Sengun. Or I want to see, even if Jabari goes to the bench, I want to see Cam and Amen Thompson both start for them next season. But I know that's not going to be the case right away. One of them could start. I could see one of them starting, but I don't think there's any way that they bench Jalen Green going into a contract season. Like that would cause some uproar with his agency. They would be like, "Hey, you're screwing our guy out of a lot of money here." But I don't know. I think there's a very good shot that we get later in the season, and I think that they realize, hey, these younger guys are a little bit better than Dylan Brooks and Jalen, and yeah, I could see that happening. What do we think about Reed's playing time next year?
Reed Shepherd? Yeah. I mean, I think I'm high on him. Like I said, I like him coming off the bench. I mean, this is a guy that I think is going to come in NBA ready shooting. And he's that guy that you kind of just get off the bench that can hit a three point for you. 3 point. I see him making a huge impact on this team. Or maybe not a huge impact, but getting significant time, getting significant playing time.
Yeah, he'll be their backup point
Yeah,
guard for sure. Um,
yeah.
like future backcourt of Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson sounds great. Um, but
Oh yeah.
and I think those skill sets play off of each other like wonderfully. We'll see in a couple of years, but I think Reed right away will step into a starting, or not a starting, but a backup role, like at the start of the season. Um, these Houston recently has really liked guys who know the game, right? Like that's since Ime's brought in, they've Fred VanVleet, right, really knows the game of basketball. Dylan Brooks knows the ins and outs of defense. He shoots a bunch of stupid shots, but man, he at least knows they're stupid. I'm pretty sure. Sengun, they love Sengun. He very knowledgeable of the game. There's a reason they're throwing him in trade rumors. Like he's pretty damn good, right? And then they just and they have Amen, who he's a genius on the basketball court at 19 years old. Reads very similarly, like just really knows the game really well. Is how I like to. So I think this is a great fit here in Houston for him. Backup center, we'll have Steven Adams for sure. And then
Oh yeah.
wing players for them.
I like Jayshawn Tate, Cam Whitmore, um, shit, Jeff Green too. Can't forget about Jeff Green.
Another center option too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I guess when they go small ball.
Yeah, he's kind of their small ball option. And then Tari Eason, I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. I like Tari.
Oh yeah. Where? I don't know where he is. Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, Tari Eason. Yeah, all those are really good options. This is going to be another, you know. Unfortunately, the West is really deep. Um, but this is going to be a team that's going to be in that playing conversation for sure. You get a team that was there last year. We're going to answer the question: did they get better or worse? But I mean, this is looking like a really good. This is looking like a really solid squad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can start. Do we think they got better this offseason?
Yeah, I think 100% they got better. You don't really lose anybody. Um, your draft was really good, and I think your free signings were very. I mean, Aaron Holiday's a really solid backup option.
Yeah, they're 12 deep.
But yeah, really good team. Yeah, they got better for sure, 100%.
And like counting Steven Adams too, like man, with Reed really helping their shooting ability, Steven Adams should really help their ability to defend in the post a little bit. Like this is a great thing. I think they're a team that if they're really pushing at the deadline, they could move a bunch of pieces for one piece is a thing they could do. If not, somebody might really like Jalen Green at the deadline. If Houston wants to maybe get some future assets for him, maybe somebody really wants Sengun, they Godfather offer them for Sengun. I really like what they did this offseason, even if it wasn't fully going all in yet. I don't think you need to go all the way in yet. I think this season could be similar to next season in win total, but I think they did overall improve their roster. Offensive MVP, defensive MVP, X factor for them.
I think I'm going to go Albert Sengun again for offensive MVP. Just because the offense really just runs through him. He'll be getting most of the touches. He'll be getting most of the points. He'll be getting most of the assists. Defensive player. There's a lot. There's a lot to go. I'll go Amen Thompson. I think Amen Thompson's gonna go great. Like you said, really good defender. I think it only goes up. This is one of the better defensive teams we've talked about. I think in recent episodes, unless I'm forgetting a team.
Since Minnesota, yeah.
Yeah. So, just it's unlike other episodes. I feel like there's a lot to pick from on this team. But yeah, I'll go Amen Thompson. And X Factor, I'm gonna say Jabari Smith. Um, you know, he's already a really good player. I think that he could just be a lot more. Um, and it would just be really fun just to see a 6'11" Jabari Smith just confident, hooping, getting buckets. Um, I mean, just even at his Auburn days, he's just really fun to watch score. And I think it opens up a lot for this
Yeah.
offense and gives you an option, a shooting option next to Sengun for a floor spacer, and then you also get the really good defensive help side defense, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and he's also a good small ball five option too. Um,
Yeah,
I want to make one comment on Jabari because he wasn't my pick for X Factor, but if he can really take a next step defensively, which I think he probably could, he's got the height, length, and he does seem like he knows the game pretty well. Um, if he can take the next step defensively, I think this could really elevate at least their starting unit to where suddenly this is an amazing starting unit defensively. Even with Sengun's defensive deficiencies, like Jokic needed his Aaron Gordon. If Jabari Smith can take that next step forward, I think that's huge for this team. Um, Offensive MVP, I had Fred VanVleet. I just don't see how I pull all those numbers on him with the young players and not say Fred VanVleet. He's such a great organizer of everything. Um, Excellent passer. He makes you know, out of all their guys who need to take pull-up shots and the difficult isolation shots, I think he probably needs to take most of them. He struggles to get to the rim a little bit, but just the ability to organize this offense was huge for them last year is the big reason they took a step forward. Defensive MVP, I kind of just went with Amin Thompson, just like you. I think that he kind of has the highest ceiling of this team defensively. Like he might be able to guard 1 through 5 if he really takes a step forward on that side. Maybe he struggles a little bit at point of attack, but his weak side defense, his passing lane defense, really interesting weak side rim protector. That's how I feel about Amin. And then X factor for them, I think, is Jalen Green. For all the reasons I mentioned, if his efficiency is as good as it was uh, in the 2 month span that he was really good, then suddenly I do kind of have to respect that, even if he's not a great playmaker, right? Like that type of scoring volume and efficiency, like, you know, it's like pre-bubble Devin Booker-esque, right? Like before Devin Booker really took steps forward as a passer, right? It's maybe not a top 20 player, but it's a top 30 player in the league for sure. And if Jalen Green takes that step forward with shooting efficiency, I think that's huge for this team. And it's huge for him too, because he'll legitimately get that huge contract that we had talked about him not being worth yet. So, any comments on that? All right. Unless you have anything else on Houston, this should pretty much wrap it up for Houston. One of the teams that I was very excited for, mainly because how I feel about their young players. I think they're awesome. Yeah. What do you good to wrap it up here for Houston?
yeah. This is gonna be one of the teams that we're gonna be talking about in the West for a while, for sure. And even maybe this year, who knows?
Yeah. Well, we'll see where they are next season, but I'm looking forward to this episode next season to see how all of these things have developed. So that'll do it for this episode for the Houston Rockets. Next episode will be the Memphis Grizzlies. It should be coming out in 2 days. We will see you then.